Welcome to clarify it. We live in strange times. Politicians label each other as fascist and Nazi, and they've done it for so long and so naturally that the words may have begun to lose their horrific content for some. We are living in a time when, even with the support of former President Václav Klaus, a candidate who did not hesitate to use Nazi rhetoric on social media, for example, by verbally sending a particular person to the gas chamber, made his way into the European Parliament. And we live in a time when it is increasingly being forgotten what atrocities were the result of Hitler's real fascism and Nazism. That's why, in the days when we commemorate the 82nd anniversary of the burning of the village of Lidice as one of the most horrific acts of Hitler's Nazism, we bring you in a renewed premiere, the last interview with a woman who survived the burning of Lidice, survived her stay in the German Nazi concentration camps, went through the Germanization, and upon her return told about all the horrors she had experienced all her life. Watch how Mrs. Marie Šupíková talked about her life with her great-granddaughter.
Oh, Kaya? Anyone can love you any way they like. It could be the one, the closest relative. Mom? No one can replace you?
Ten-year-old Marie Šupíková from Lidice was taken by the Nazis to the Kladno Gymnasium with her mother in June 1942, which Mrs. Šupíková refers to as a real school. There they forcibly separated them from their mother and then took them to a collection camp in Polska Bot, where they chose to re-educate her in a German family. By 1946, she was living under the name Ingeborg Schiller in Poznan and Boysenburg. Her father and brother were shot, and her mother died soon after her return from Ravensbrück concentration camp. After the war, 15-year-old Marie testified as a child witness in Nuremberg at the Lebensborn trial. Throughout her life, Mrs. Šupíková passed on her testimony of the horrors of the war to younger generations as an eyewitness. Today, it is her great-granddaughter who is continuing her efforts. The death of Maria Šupíková in March 19 was reported by the world media. A full-page obituary was carried by the American newspaper in the New York Times. During her lifetime, Mrs. Šupíková gave a large number of interviews to Czech and foreign journalists and historians. However, the very last interview with her was conducted by her 13-year-old great-granddaughter Karolina just a few weeks before her death.
Hello, I am Karolina Čermáková. I am 14 years old. And I was 13 at the time when I actually spoke to my grandmother for the last time, which I had no idea. I used to call her Grandma Šupí. She was a very cool person in that she understood me terribly. She was very funny, witty, and she was still alive. She was still young in spirit. She was fresh. She was up for any fun. And there was always a respect, a nice kind of respect, but like a respect that even when she came to school, she came to tell us what actually happened in Lidice at that time. Everybody were all the time quiet. Even the boys didn't talk. They were all quiet and listened to it because actually everyone there changed that respect, and actually they were glad that she came and said when the reporters came in during the cutting they wanted to do an interview. Of course I'm proud that just Grandma is like a famous person, but of course it was still Grandma that I had a relationship with that I didn't really relate to.
Listen to a unique interview of a surviving Lidice child, Maria Šupíková, with her great-granddaughter. An interview that would never have happened if the German Nazis' plan of 1942 had been carried to completion. If Lidice and the people of Lidice had indeed been wiped off the map of the world and from human memory. Karolina asks, Marie Šupíková answers.
I would like to focus on how it was when they sprinkled some into your rat.
Okay,
How did it go?
Good. Yes. That was the evening, June 9 to 10 actually. The night was starting. We were all ready to go to bed. There were some terrible blows outside the door. So Daddy got dressed again quickly, went to answer the door, but by the time he got to the door, the soldiers, the Germans, were already in the hallway. They didn't wait for someone to open the door, but they broke down the front door, the first one, and they were standing in the hallway. And now they started yelling at us to get dressed quickly and that we had to leave the house. And we didn't know why. And even though we asked, Daddy asked with Mommy, there was still no answer. No answer. Eventually we had to leave the house. And they took us on a torch to the farmhouse. And that's where we actually stood. I don't know what time it was, about 9-10 hours. We stood in the courtyard all night until morning. There was a dung heap next door. I remember that. We stood there all night. And when it started to get light, and then the others would come in, people, citizens, they started to come in, and pretty soon they were actually there. All the citizens, human beings. We were standing there in the yard. Some of us were. We were in the basement first, so they took us out. So we stood in that yard and waited to see what would happen. Well, we didn't know what happened to the people, nothing. But when we did, I didn't, but Mrs. Hornick, the memoirist, said that when they were at the station when they were being taken away. Workers, the employees, the station workers, they were walking around the train checking that everything was okay. And when they said, Lidice is burning, Lidice is burning. So our citizens were still on the train station. And they were already on the train. Set fire to them. They were already preparing it in the afternoon. I don't know, but that's what the adults say. That they had already started to surround the people. They did this they just surrounded it, from one end to the other end so that nobody got in or out of their consciousness, but especially not out. Inside, maybe they still let in, they said, but nobody out, and now they were going from house to house, checking whether or not the people were there. Well, we had the misfortune of living in the first house.
What was it like? Did you have time to say goodbye to your dad, your brother?
They kicked us out into that yard. And we stood there all night, and then no, we didn't. We didn't say goodbye. We didn't say goodbye. The soldiers just came and took Daddy away, and that was the end of it. I hope we didn't see him. Well, we still stayed there. And then you know what happened next. They took us kids to the loggia, to the real school, then to the loggia. That's when the mothers were still in the affirmative. Some say they were ready for transport to Ravensbrück. I don't know. Well, we didn't see each other after that.
What was it like when you said goodbye to that mother when you were brought there to that rally, and then how did you say goodbye?
Kaya, saying goodbye to your mom was a waste. Who gave you life? Who took care of you? For 10 years, I can hardly put into words a goodbye that was obviously very difficult. Imagine that you're going somewhere and that you're going to have to be a mom. You can imagine that someone would come and say so, and now you're going to go away. Can you imagine? Well, you see, I could imagine it too. And before you what's the vernacular nowadays? Before you get it all, it's too late. It's too late. Yeah, my mom was already gone. Grandma was gone. Last time I saw my brother was in real school. Well, my brother didn't go with me anymore either. Well, how did he end up, executed in a week of cops? Actually, he was executed in Prague by night shift semi-workers because that's where they found out he'd crossed the 15-year mark. So, that's how our family ended up. Well, my grandmother and my mother, they were in the camp. Grandma didn't come back. Grandma stayed there. Well, and so I was with my mother. My mother was very ill. She had tuberculosis. It was inexplicable. And today I was just...
"80 years ago, events still affect the lives of Lidice today. Karolina, Marie Šupíková's great-granddaughter, would like to go to the grammar school in Kředa after finishing primary school. What would it mean for her to go every day to the building where her great-grandmother last saw her brother, who was later shot by the Nazis, and where the Nazis forcibly separated her from her mother? The surviving Lidice children and their descendants still go to the gymnasium of the Kleden Gymnasium, laying flowers on the 10th of June, and always on the exact spot where they were torn away from their mothers.
Then, for example, if I went to that gym where I actually go every year, I would lay the flower where I went with my grandmother. I would have probably, when my grandmother actually lost her mommy grandmother, and now if I were to go back there, I don't know.
Mrs. Marie Šupíková considered it her duty to give testimony about what happened during the war. She shared her experiences both at home and abroad. The audience didn't even hold their breath during her explanation. And what did she do to win them over? She was naturally able to distinguish the audience in front of her and adapt her interpretation accordingly. She sensitively conveyed the events of the war to children. When they grew up, she added the cruel experiences. The granddaughter of Marie Šupíková and mother of Karolina, Mrs. Ivana Kratochvílová, speaks.
My grandmother, when she was still telling stories, she always had the gift of knowing how to give it to you. She always guessed what your soul could take. And then when I had Kaya, it wasn't until the day after I had Kaya that I realized what those women and those children had to go through. Even though she told me about it, it was still like, didn't quite get it until after the baby was born. And then my grandmother also told me other things that she hadn't told me before. Because only the grandmother can really understand a mother, like when they were being torn apart in the dump. Before that, when I had Kaya, she said, well, they were screaming at us to get apart. And so the moms let us go. They promised them we'd go up front so we'd be comfortable. And then when I had Kaya, my grandmother says, they were shooting at the ceiling. They were yelling at us, machine guns everywhere. Actually, there were more of those things then, which you learned they were tearing them apart. That must have been terrible.
These are the words of the granddaughter of Mrs. Maria Šupík, which clearly illustrate how she knew how to present the cruelty of German Nazism and fascism differently for children, differently for their mothers, differently for historical researchers, and differently for the judges at Nuremberg. The interview between Maria Šupíková and her great-granddaughter Karolina continues.
Well, my mother and grandmother were there. I was with them in the camp. Then I came to that child to Litzmannstadt. They stayed there. They were transferred to Ravensbrück. And that's where the end came. The end of the war. And I got in between that. So to the orphanage, I was lucky that amongst those kids that I was chosen as German, as being able to learn German.
I'm interested in the Polish thing.
So what?
Well, how did they get you there? How long were you there?
We went around, they brought us there, crammed into a truck. We got there.
We got out there.
And there was this truck ready for us. Space. It was a decommissioned factory. And there were 2 rooms, and from those 2 rooms we piled in. There were about 100 of us, our kids. And there we were just waiting to see what would happen next. And I don't know, after a week, a fortnight, 10, 4 weeks, 14 days, the Gestapo just came in and made us sit on the floor, walked among us, and we were there pointing at somebody. And we were 6 of us, all girls. And there were these siblings, the half-sisters, you know, there's Carrasco who is in there.
What were your chops? Well, they're hawks.
There's this Vinusek, their brother. Among the big group, I've already been chosen. The 6 of us have already been chosen. And they started crying, begging to promise their mother that they'd take care of this little brother. And then, so they picked him. So we were in the lodge, the collection camp. Then we went to the other camp in the lodge. It was better there because in the first one we slept on the floor. We slept in the clothes that we were in. We had no place to shower, to wash. We were dirty. Until we got to the second camp where the beds were already there and there were only 7 of us chosen. They took care of us. That is, we could bathe, take a shower. We were given spare clothes. We were also given nightwear. And then we stayed there. I don't know, for a month or so. And I was there. So they were going to see these German families, like I said. And they wanted to pick out a kid. Adoption, because it was a home where they were just concentrating the children that were being taught to be adopted. So German families would go there if they were interested. And they would pick. So I went there with the other children. There were 7 of us. And I was lucky enough to get the Schiller children. And they just picked me out. I didn't know what was going to happen. Nobody knew. They chose you and you didn't know what they were going to do with you. Because the thing is, as we found out after the war, they did all sorts of operational experiments. You know, I don't know if on children, but mostly on adults, not young girls.
Even the Shaladas?
No, that's where she put it. That's where the lager.
Yeah, it's not.
No, it was the Schiller family that I was with that married me. And that's who I ended up with, and that's the family that took me. Well, that's where they found me, in that family. Even though we lived in Poznan. So when the war was coming to an end, of course, all those people were running away from the front, further into the Reich. And that's where I got to Bosenberg, you know. That's where the end of the war actually caught me. And you see, and my mother and my grandmother, my mother was
Finished
in New Brandenburg, I think, or just from Bleak. And someone was in New Brandenburg. So we were actually a few dozen kilometers apart, because these towns are also in the Mecklenburg area, where I was in that, where Ravensbrück is. So you see, a few kilometers, and that's it. That's ironic. We didn't know about each other. Well, it was a lucky break that the Germans kept me then, and that I came back. Unfortunately, my mother died 4 months later. My aunt took me in, and she says, anyone can like you any way they like. It can be the closest relative. Mom, no one can replace you. It's sad, But the lucky thing is that that Mommy's back, and that kept her alive, that she knew enough to know that they found me and that I was coming home. That kept her alive too. However, she had severe tuberculosis. And 4 months later, after I came back, she died. So I was left alone again, staying with my aunt, who was my dad's sister. She wasn't bad, but was very strict, which was probably necessary at the time, because I was some 14 or 15 years old. So she was like pretty strict with me. So she raised me to be a proper girl. That I didn't, I didn't get wet, that I didn't have those parents, that she really took care of me, which she promised my mother on her deathbed. Well, I respected her, Kaya, but
I get that, but it wasn't the same?
It wasn't that, and I didn't find that connection, that affection for her, even as an aunt. Pasca Zelensky's mom, the stepmom, you know her?
No, Vera, it's like, Zelenka's mom. Oh, right.
Yeah, and she started taking care of me, really well, and I was grateful for that, because it was a person who at least had a nice and a wake-up call for me. Well, I had a very, quote-unquote, you could say colorful, childhood home. Boot camp like this, children's home, family. And then the orphanage, when I was taken away from that family, when I came back, I was waiting to come back. And it's all kind of burned into your little child's soul. And how many times do I remember it like that? And I wonder how it's possible that you endured it all, that you survived it all. Don't you get tired of it?
No, it just...
Yeah, I do. So where am I now, baby?
That you were wondering what it was like. You're looking, how does a person have this...
I've been through all this and survived. I was there for 4 years, actually, in Germany. I was in that orphanage.
What was it like there?
It was a normal orphanage. It was strict. There was a regime. We got there because I had nothing but what I was wearing. Clothes and stuff, but then it was like tearing because I was walking around in it, sleeping in it. We were lying on the ground on the bare concrete, kaya bare concrete in the summer. But it cools you down after all. And now we're not so dressed up, but of course, like for summer, it's not. It's true that some kids had a blanket or something like that because, it was very chaotic too. They came to our house on the night of the 9th to the 10th. So we didn't have time to pack anything, get ready. They just came and we had to get out immediately. So all I had on was what my mommy could get me to put on. I had a shirt, panties, sports, I remember, black sports panties, white shirt. And then she put a little dress, barefoot, the crotchets. And I was crowing, and she gave me a spring jacket.
It was
a jacket, a coat, a jacket, a light jacket, like a palette or something, like a brown one, beautiful. So she put it on me, but I was barefoot and I had creepers. So this is how I wandered from Il Movo, and I ended up in the boat first. And that's where we all ended up. And then that's where I was chosen with a couple of other kids, and we didn't know why. We were afraid of what would happen to us, where they would take us, why they would separate us from the others. Well, we didn't find out until we got to the orphanage, where they took everything away from us, our stuff. We got institutional stuff. And I'm lucky they didn't take my earrings, so I kept them. When I got from Mrs. Nayeli Tomitoast, she was so hard on me. They were with me all the time. And that's how it was. Well, I got out of the orphanage, the family came, they picked. And the headmistress came in and says that it's some family, an overseas family from Poznan. Mr. Schiller's family, he had a big business. Paper, he was a Reich German, his wife was Polish. They were very sober, nice people, they liked me, that's probably why they married me. So I went to him. I got the name Ingeborg Schiller. So my name I lost my name. So they always called me Ingeborg at school, Ingeborg. I'm not used to it at all, because I had my own name in the kindergarten. But I got used to it and I found out they're really very, very nice people who really liked me, and I came there, Kaya. I had a new dress ready, a little haircut. They really took great care of me. They took me in as one of their own, because this Mrs. Schiller,
being like
she was, and they had Jane, 2 kids, a boy, died, and they were already old. Well, Mrs. Schiller was already over 40-something, and Mr. Schiller was in his 50s.
How come the sons died?
Yeah, I don't know. They were newborns that died. Mrs. Schiller gave birth to a baby boy, let's say. I don't know how long it took for the little boy to die. Yeah, that's how I heard it. That they had babies that died. And because they were old, Mrs. Schiller was in her 40s. And Schiller was in his 50s. And they obviously didn't want to be left alone in their old age. So they stayed in that orphanage in Poznan. So they went there. There were more of us kids there, so they chose. They'd always pick me out, put me through my paces for a test at home. That's what you know, for example. And then they'd bring him back. And they found out like it would work. So the Schiller family came in, picked me. I was grateful. They were very nice. They were older people, but they were very nice. Well, I like to think of them, Kaya, very much, very gladly, and I cried when I walked away from them and they were crying. That's life, that's life. So that's the life I had, girl.
As has been reported, Marie Šupíková's fate was decided 80 years ago in a disused factory in Poland by a German Gestapo officer who selected her and 6 other Lidice children for Germanization. And how does great-granddaughter Carolina look at the fateful role of a German Nazi who decided the life and death of the little Lidice children?
It's unbelievable how 1 minute was enough to do that. To actually decide the fate of all of us. My mother, my grandmother, hers. So I'm very aware of that, because if she had been, the Gestapo hadn't picked her, we wouldn't have been here and it would have been a very different story.
The interview of great-granddaughter Carolina with Marie Šupíková continues. In contrast to the horrors of the Lidice tragedy and its consequences, they talk together about the idyllic childhood of little Maruška in pre-war Lidice.
In old Lidice, was that 10 years? But after that, it didn't suck much. Because everybody's got their grown-up ones, and everybody was driving me differently. I know she had that girl, he didn't come back, but it wasn't my fault.
Well.
I would have preferred it if she had been... My mother got better, which was impossible because she had severe tuberculosis. Or my grandmother, she loved herself there, she loved me there. That was her mom. That's where she usually raised me, because my mother went to work for the peasants. We had a small, well, not a farmer, we had different ones. We had piglets, goats, goose, ducks, so we had to make sure there was some food for them. And that's why, like me, the baby and the others, the little sows, they always went in a flock to the field where it was glided, where we would herd the geese, and they'd walk around the field picking up the grains, and we'd pick up the logs. Well, in the fall, between then baking potatoes in the Venati. So I have fond memories of my childhood. Like you. Really childlike. Country. Do you enjoy it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what it was like before the war.
Before the war?
Before the Germans invaded, when you were herding geese, and what was it like?
Well, look, I was 10 when it happened. And we were, from the time we were alive, everyone in those people, even though the men used to go to the mines to work the shafts, to work in the smelters, everybody had this, it's called foggy. That is, he had a piece of the field. Had cattle, yeah, and that was still the livelihood here. And so that's what we had at home. So I used to go to school, and when I came home from school, I'd do my homework. And I had the geese ready. And I'd go out to the pasture with them, and the girls were grazing, and they were grazing. I was picking up logs in the field next door. And then we took a bunch of, the geese, and we drove them into the pond to cool off, bathe, get clean. And then we went home. And that's always, we're either basket log or we made it into bouquets. And we always, who got the bigger bouquets, yeah. Well, we'd race each other. But that was a real country childhood. It's not like that anymore. That's not today. And I'm proud of him. And I love to remember him and regret that I don't. It's just that all kids had that as a chance to live that childhood life, yeah. I have fond memories of it.
And what about like the scleros that you did? Did you tell them that the Germans took you away like that?
They knew from the orphanage.
It's so...
You know, they didn't ask me like a lot of questions either. The workers in it, like, you know, to like question us too much, like, well, they said we were children. From the areas that the Germans took back.
You know,
I don't know if you understand.
Did you understand Czech?
Yeah, I do. And I've gotten back into the Lidic beer. And I heard again, you know, it's hard. You get somewhere, you only know your mother tongue. And now you come somewhere and you hear nothing but German. Of course, you force yourself to speak. So they have to try to just get the language, to learn it, to master it. It wasn't easy. Because she and Mrs. Schiller, she wasn't pure German, she was Polish. So she had sometimes like blackouts. She couldn't see how to say something in German. Yeah, so we were both the same. But she was a lady. And Mr. Schiller, such a great man. They loved me very much and I was very happy with them, and I cried very, very much when I left them because I couldn't see where to. I went into uncertainty. I didn't see what was waiting for me here. I mean, my auntie picked me up, but what's next? Nobody knew, so I was so unsure. You know, I'm sorry that some people that had kids, like you have beautiful kids, you know, yeah. I mean, appreciate it. Appreciate it. Your parents are committed to you. You get what you want, you get everywhere. You go to all these things, races, businesses. Appreciate it, girl. I missed all that, especially missing my parents. I feel sorry for her, that sometimes I was too mean to my mom. Not too much, just once. Daddy told me to go sleep with the geese, he knows. And the girls went to play, and I was sorry. So I went too, and then it didn't pay off. And from then on I was obedient, I didn't go anywhere anymore.
So who was your best friend, or who was the one you had the most fun with?
Jaruška Štorkovec?
Which one? Jarushka? That's when your mom used to go work for them.
When my mom worked for them?
Or...
Well, Yarrow Stork. We were friends from school because they went there from the macro, from the girl. Well...
And she never came back after that?
Just...
She didn't come back after that like she ever...
Jarushka didn't come back, Jarushka. No, she didn't come back. Of all the kids I've been with, as a friend does. The ones who did go back were girls who hadn't even been to school properly.
Marie Šupíková's best friend Jaroslava Štorková was murdered by the Nazis with gas in Chełmno. She was less than 10 years old. Her father was shot during the burning of Lidice, and her grandmother was gassed in Auschwitz. Her mother Jaroslava was the only survivor of the family. She returned from the Ravensbrück concentration camp and lived in the new Lidice until her death. She outlived her husband and daughter by 36 years.
She seems to have gone to sleep.
They were mostly that we were Anička Hanfová, Maruška Vašek. They were the children who were chosen with me, Emilka Frehová, and they were the ones who went to school. Emilka went to school, I don't know, 7, 6. Well, and Anička. Maruška, she went to the town school after that. Vasek Hanf. That's not even true anymore. You think about it like that. You think about it. You wonder if I've got it all. If it wasn't all just a dream, a nightmare. But then when you look next door,
It wasn't.
you find out that no, it's bare. A hard fact that a man can be young, 10 years old, can lose everything, lose your home, a family. I was lucky then that my mother came back. Well, but it was sad. I wouldn't wish this on anyone. You're getting in with strangers. Some are nice, some take advantage of you. It's not good. We're having a debate, okay?
But I'm interested now because what you know is true.
Kaya. Kaya, I'm glad.
I'm interested because, today you can look it up on the internet. It was all, but from living memory, who has the opportunity,
I understand. Look, never. Nobody can give you that. You can tell them that. You understand, but it's still someone interpreting it. Yeah, it's not you, the person who's really doing this, but just passed it on to someone, you understand me? Well, so it's like there's a big difference. Of course that the participant always makes it worth more, the value. I appreciate it so much. Well,
Marie Šupíková's great-granddaughter, Karolina Babič, has vowed to pass on her experiences and personal testimony.
For example, I had a conversation with the entertainer outside of the interview, of course. So I promised her that one day when I have my own children, or my own friends, of course, I will pass it on. And maybe recently when actually our school went to Lidice to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the burning of Lidice. So because some of my classmates are either from far away or from Prague, for example, and they have no idea what actually happened then. So I told them about it and they were all like, I didn't know that, thank you. I hope I'm doing it right, like the party girl wanted. But I don't think it's right to just let it go, because that's what they need to be repeated, to be spread, to be remembered, because it was a tragedy what happened back then.
Experiences read by all generations do not forget their past. In the year 2020, the Lidice Memory Society was founded on the initiative of a surviving Lidice child, Mr. Pavel Horešovský. Its aim is to preserve, commemorate and spread the legacy of the burning of the village. The granddaughter of Mrs. Šupíková, Ivana Kratochvílová, talks about the task of the third and fourth generation of Lidice.
That is our destiny. That is why we joined the memory group. Into that association, when we actually feel there are many more of us, children or grandchildren, great-grandchildren, when we felt at the moment when Grandma Šupí and Mr. Zelenka died, that we had an obligation not to give away that history, because they had been trying to do that all their lives because they didn't want it to happen again. That's why they went to the elementary school, to the college, to the talks, to tell these people what must never happen again. And we realized that we actually now have an obligation to carry on that history for them in a big way, that we actually have a great directness and a great duty. Really, Mihail Zelenka and I agreed, and there are now an awful lot of us who have signed up for this memory group, that we hope that they're looking down on us and say, I hope we're doing it.
Maria Šupíková's life during the wartime Germanization was intertwined with her own Lidice family in the 1990s. The childhood of little Marushka with the Schiller family and the journey in the footsteps of her adoptive parents 50 years later are recounted by her great-grandmother, granddaughter and great-granddaughter.
How was your childhood with the Schellers? Like, did you go to, I don't know, the theater?
It was the most Nazi-oriented family at the time. It was a mixed family. And the husband was an Imperial German and the wife was Polish by birth, and she had siblings. Her mother was sick there. Old. She had sisters there and she had a brother there. They were a very, very nice family. They weren't in any parties. Mr. Schiller didn't go to any meetings. Mr. Schiller had a big paper shop. He had postcards, letterheads, envelopes, all kinds of papers. And I, as an adopted daughter, like Ingeborg, I used to go there. I used to help in the warehouse. I enjoyed it. And she was there for that. Where he had the office, the building there was a passage to the park, so we used to go there for coffee, you know. And when I came back, when I was like questioned, like they were on duty. And that's what I always get told off for when I'm talking, and it's like, yeah, you were on duty, right? I'm like, well, it's not my fault. I guess they could afford it. Maybe I was lucky, considering how the other kids all ended up.
And how does great-granddaughter Caroline feel about such good fortune in adversity?
When I found out that they were being nice to her, that they were taking her, for example, to splash and swim like that, I was like, that it wasn't just everything in the war that was bad that happened to her, that there were moments of joy, and that the last time you saw them...
The last time I saw them was August 46. Well, August 46. Because on the 8th, August 7th, I came back on the 46th.
In the 90s, her entire Lidice family followed in the footsteps of Marie Šupíková, renamed Ingeborg Schiller during the Germanization, recalls her granddaughter Ivana Kratochvilová.
Good. One summer, her grandmother declared, a search for her footsteps, that we really sat the whole family in the car, me, my brother, my parents, my grandmother. And we actually drove to the places where she lived with the Schiller family. She even found the store, I still remember it, and my grandmother was always telling us about it. And we even managed to find the farm where the brother lived. And I remember that because to me it was an old man, an old room. But my grandmother would tell him stories and she would speak German and he would recognize her. He remembered that as he went to that family, the grandmother says, yes, he remembers me, he remembers the little girl, and it was very powerful. That he remembered her, and he was still saying, yeah, you're the little girl who played the piano. It was terribly interesting. I didn't know in all that time that my grandmother could play the piano. And the Schiller family taught her to play the piano. And it wasn't until one time when she was staying with us and Kaya was playing the piano, and she sat down and played something, and I said, Grandma, can you play the piano? Yeah, but I don't want to play. That's what my grandmother told me, that they actually came to the office and she thought she was saying goodbye. But they just opened the door, the man said, "Come in." Grandma went in, they closed the door, and they never saw each other again.
The last conversation of the surviving Lidice child and the last ever meeting of Marie Šupíková with her beloved great-granddaughter Karolina was coming to an end. And only one question remained in the air. How could people ever do such a thing?
It's just as cool that those Germans had the stomach to just gas the children and kill them, like overall people.
I can't understand it. These were people, these were dads from families that had kids too, or they do this to other kids. It's just that we don't understand the kids. These were Slovakian peoples, and the Germans wanted to conquer them. They hated them. And so unfortunately they took revenge in this way too, so that we wouldn't breed like... So this liquidation just went down. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. I don't know exactly how many children have died in that hen house. I can't even count. It was an extermination camp, it was called. There was a gas chamber, runaways who were old, sick, and the simpler ones were just a burden to feed. They couldn't do anything for them, they didn't work, that's how they disposed of them too. It's sad, Kaya. I'm telling it like it is, but you're not going to learn about it? It's written about everywhere. Hitler wanted to conquer the whole world. He did. Which, thank God, on himself. We chose the subject, didn't we? That's what's interesting, because this is, as they say, a dark period in our history.
The view of Maria Šupík's great-granddaughter, now 14-year-old Karolina.
Personally, I don't understand how a person could do that at all. Of course, I'm sure there was pressure from above that they had to do it. But still, I don't know, they must have had some sort of remorse, and if they didn't, then, I don't know. I can't even stand up in words what I think about it completely, because I don't have kids, of course, but just the idea of you having a child of your own, but just letting the other child get killed is just so repulsive to me that I would maybe, personally, I could never deal with that. Either I wouldn't do it, or I'd probably go crazy myself.
In the Chelmno extermination camp, an estimated 150 to 300,000 people were killed, mostly Jews. 82 Lidice children were murdered there by the Germans in mobile gas chambers. But neither the murder of the Lidice men and most of the children, nor the deportation of the Lidice women to a concentration camp, nor the burning of the village, nor the shifting of the stream bed, nor the filling in of the pond where little Maruska Kupadusi went, nor even the liquidation of the local rebelliousness ended the history of Lidice. On the contrary. The granddaughter of Marie Šupíková, Ivana Kratochvílová, speaks.
I think that everybody in Lidice, because of what happened, actually those women and those children, on the contrary, wanted Lidice to live. And Lidice is alive, I must say. And those people are really sticking together, standing up for each other. I have to say that that kind of unity in this day and age is just as you don't find, not just in a family, but in that whole village. So they're all trying to hold on to that legacy, but I think the tragedy, but it actually brought the people together, and we won the fact that Lidice is alive.
I'm so glad the last time I spoke to her that it was a conversation like this. And I'm glad that before my grandmother died, I actually managed to do everything on my own. When I was a kid, she used to come out with me. She used to come with me to the 5 territories there. She used to say to me, "Caroline, you have to be quiet here. No jumping, no running, no anything like that." It's sad. Well, we're missing.
I'm just glad someone in the family is interested. to be this detailed. He cares. I really, really appreciate it. I really appreciate it. You don't know how. Even my mom didn't have that much. I guess she didn't want to hurt me. I'm not taking it. I'd love to. And I'm glad she didn't have to go through what I did. If anyone asked me, I'd say yes like this. It's not easy. So like I just agreed that you're interested in my faith. I value it very highly, mind you. And I do. Yeah, I do. You're a hottie.